We've got the Skeptics Challenge, where Australian Skeptics challenge the coordinator managing the Skeptics $100,000 challenge program for anyone who can provide scientific proof of a paranormal power. So I'm going to hand this over to you, Ian Bryce. Please make Ian welcome.
Thank you. Testing. How's that? Okay. Well, this is a report I give occasionally on the progress of the $100,000 challenge from my particular point of view. So that's got it. So there's an introduction to it. The challenge has been around since 1982. The amount of money has varied. Other groups offer prizes as well. And there's the check, and there really is money behind it. So if someone satisfies the conditions, they will collect the check. So the challenge is to people who claim to have extraordinary powers. They need to demonstrate their ability under proper observing conditions. There's a phrase from Randy. The fields could be paranormal or psychic or supernatural, and my specialty is anything new to science. Examples could be if you can generate free energy, or if you can read minds or communicate with extraterrestrials, and so on. So how it comes about, they can apply for the $100,000 prize, or we hear about them and approach them, or third parties can bring them to our notice. If it's valid, they'll get $100,000 and lots of prestige and recognition, and of course there could be a Nobel Prize in the pipeline for them. We'd be very happy to be associated with that. We'd consider it money well spent. If it's unfounded or fraudulent, we'd reserve the right to expose that situation so that future clients would not waste their money. And of course, we always publish it. So this talk will cover some examples of challenges and other investigations with a scientific bent. There's a list of them there. We'll get to them one at a time. So my background, my first career was in radio communications, which exploits electromagnetic fields and the electromagnetic force for useful purposes. My second career was in aerospace, which covered rockets and aircraft and satellites, and that was about overcoming gravity. So the electromagnetic force and the gravitational force I've been working with most of my life. So my experience has shown that there are no gaps in how the world works, in our understanding of how the world works at the fundamental level, at least in the here and now. And here and now is a pretty wide area. It includes the visible universe. Do you think that's wide? And everything since the Big Bang, which is pretty well the now. So we can be quite confident when we investigate many claims that appear to contravene the laws of science. So, first one, telepathy across the world. We were approached by a man who claimed to communicate by means unknown to science. He said that he would send messages in real time to a colleague in the USA. We agreed on a test protocol, which was Sydney to New York at the same time. The Sydney team included the claimant, who would send some signals by telepathy to his colleague in the USA. And his colleague, the receiver, would be accompanied by a lawyer, and they would join the second Skeptics team in New York at a designated time. So we organised this across the world from Sydney to New York and proceeded. We were prepared if the symbols matched, that would be a success, and we'd give them a second test with stricter controls, and the money would be handed over. If the symbols did not match, but negative results, we'd have a good article. And of course, if they attempted to cheat, then that would require some further investigation. But what happened actually took us by surprise. So the New York team were waiting there. Now, New York in winter is a pretty challenging place to wait on the street corner, and the receiving party never turned up. And later events showed, we had various conversations with the claimant, says that the receiver team never existed. They existed only in his mind. So he believed he was communicating with his colleague in the USA, whom he explained to us was an Indian spirit guide. And so that's what happened. That was the outcome of that. They never turned up. They were all in his mind. He tried to tell us that they got stuck in a lift and could we do it again. We said, first we'd like some evidence that they really exist. So that's what happened there. Okay. So the outcome was we had practice in running a test. We discussed the need for pre-screening. It was reported in the Skeptic. There's the report there. Next item, pest repellers. Who's seen pest repellers advertised? You plug them into your PowerPoint and they can keep away, we'll see what. And there were 2 tests for this. Typical claims are that they emit ultrasonic waves or electromagnetic waves or energies unknown to science or harmonic vibrations or something like that. So the first skeptics test was by the late Colin Kay. His finding was that there was no effect whatsoever. In fact, when he turned on the light in the test room, the cockroaches ran behind the device. So he took that as strong evidence that it didn't work. Second test was Dr. Ian Thompson, much later. He's an entomologist. He knows about cockroaches. And he's told us that Dick Smith Electronics used to sell them along with iron generators. Now there's a name. And other things. And he tested ultrasonic pest repellers at UTS, a reputable organisation, for Choice magazine, who paid for the tests. And he showed that they were not effective against insects, but there was some evidence they were effective against rodents. So rats and mice, the ultrasonic sounds might keep them away. He also pointed out that they don't contain any chemicals, therefore they're not subject to regulation. Therefore the TGA doesn't need to be involved. It's simply a matter for fair trading. Because if they theoretically can't do anything, then there's no reason to regulate them, apparently. Okay, misuse of quantum mechanics. Okay, we can see many examples in the media. It can be claimed for healing, such as by Deepak Chopra. Now there's the name. Who's heard of Deepak Chopra? Oh dear. Okay. Energy healing of all kinds. Is it true? And wellness, there's a quantum wellness industry. As you can see, many books for sale and devices. Now on the top right you can see you can buy this device which has got knobs and dials and controls and screens and what have you. So that means that they can give it a scientific bent. And on the lower right you can buy the image doesn't come up very well, but the quantum technology cleans your field, and it's a quantum energy wellness bed. So you buy this expensive bed, which again has got lots of knobs and controls and readouts, and who knows what it does to you. It cleans your field, they claim. So do you believe that? Put your hand up if you believe that. No? Oh dear. Okay. Okay, entanglement. That's a field I know a bit more about. So the theory was put forward by John Bell in 1964, and it seems to imply that 2 particles can communicate over unlimited distances. And so that was the theory, and that hypothesis was put forward, and it was tested much later by Alain Aspect, and he devised ways to actually test it, which came many decades after the theory was there. And he gave a talk at UNSW, so I went along to that and heard him talk, and he described the probabilities involved in entanglement in such a way that I could understand them at the time, but with the passage of the decades I'm not sure I could describe it now, but it all made sense at the time. So what were the outcome of the experiments? The idea is that, as on the right, there's a diagram with 2 parties involved, Alice and Bob, and they Yes, the two particles do seem to remain correlated, which seems to be impossible. In fact, even a long distance apart, you can measure such as the spin or the polarization of the particles, and you can find out that there's a correlation there that doesn't seem to make any sense. So yes, so entanglement is real, but it can't be used to send messages, unfortunately, which means that if Alice wants to send a message to Bob, she can't do it. It's only afterwards, when you look at the results, you can work out that there's a correlation in the results that shouldn't be there. And what this means for physics is that there are two cornerstones of physics. One is locality. What happens here can't affect what happens in a remote region separated by more than the speed of light. And causality, that relates to whether one event can cause another. And what this means is that one of those cornerstones must not be true. So that's a significant implication for physics. And there's some articles there which describe entanglement and what it means for physics in a bit more detail. But for now, we're going to go to another investigation, which is Andrea Rossi and his ECAT machine, which was claimed to produce free energy from cold fusion. So how did we learn about that? Dick Smith approached the skeptics. Some of you met Dick Smith last night, and he was approached by a man who said he wanted to buy the rights in Australia for a new machine that produced energy from nothing. And Dick said, well, fortunately, I'm connected with the skeptics. I'll send Ian Bryce this claim. So he did, and it escalated from there. As you know, he's a philanthropist. He's got a long history. He's supported many worthwhile projects and publisher of Australian Geographic for many years. So, on the left we see Andrea Rossi, the so-called inventor of the ECAT, showing two Swedish nuclear physicists, real ones, taking careful observations. And on the bottom right we can see a blue box. Now that will play a role in what I'm about to tell you, the blue box. Anyway, the idea here is that this machine on the left with insulation around it generates more output than its input. So it's producing energy from nothing. And his claim that it's based on cold fusion. In other words, a nuclear reaction that occurs that at room temperature. Most of us would know that fusion occurs in the centre of the sun at about 15 million degrees. And if it occurs in a laboratory, you're likely to be in a bit of trouble. And there's a mammoth machine called ITER that's being built in France. Who's heard of ITER or ITER? Yeah, okay. That is designed to produce real fusion on an experimental basis, not usable power, but that's a long way away. Anyway, that's fusion research. Now, it claimed here, there's a diagram of Rossi's device. Basically, cold water comes in the bottom, and it goes through this device, and the steam comes out the other end. And it's a simple matter of thermodynamics to work out the amount that the water is heated, and the amount is turned to steam and the flow of water, and from that you can work out the energy input. That's all straightforward. Now, the idea here is that he claimed there was a radioactive cold fusion device in the middle. I'm sorry, that's the nickel. The black part is the nickel and catalyst powder, and there are various heating elements. Now that's the key, as we shall see. So he had a friendly physicist who came up with this theory on how it could work, how cold fusion could work in his machine. And I don't claim to understand that, and I don't think you do either. So we'll go on from that and say that they had to have a credible theory, because as you know, you need theory and you need experiments before you can claim something new to physics. Now, the two nuclear physicists observed it in great detail. To give them some credit, They took detailed measurements of what was going on and wrote it all down and instruments and took measurements and published their results in great detail. So there's the two of them there. They're both, one of them used to run the Swedish Skeptics Association. More about them later. In fact, you might note my T-shirt, which is from the Swedish Skeptics Association, and the logo says, "I am skeptical." So that's true enough. That's okay. So the scientists made typical comments like, "We've examined every wire and every pipe. We've seen it operating for 8 hours continuously. We've measured the input and output electrical power. We've seen steam issuing from the outlet hose, and the water flow and temperature indicated input power of 3,000 watts. Therefore, we've calculated that hidden batteries couldn't do the job. Therefore, we see no explanation in accordance with physics other than Mr. Rossi's explanation of cold fusion." So that's what the scientists wrote. He even fooled 3 physicists, PhDs from NASA, such that one of them produced this report showing how he could use Rossi's cold fusion device in a future rocket. Isn't that amazing? So Rossi was very convincing. Now, the scientists assumed that this was the diagram of how it worked. So there's an Italian PowerPoint there with active, earth and neutral, same as Australia. It goes through some wires, and then measuring the input electrical power. The current meter is measuring the current in the active wire, which was 1.5 amps in this case. And the earth wire is there for protection, and there's a return. And that went into the blue box, as we shall see, and into his device with various controllers in here, and initiated and controlled the nuclear reaction, the cold fusion reaction. So that's what they thought that's what the scientists described they were seeing. Now see if you can spot the change. Can anyone see a change between the two? We can take some comments. You can, okay. What we can see here, so this is how it could be hot wired, as I reported all those years ago, that he'd commented the earth wire and connected it to active, so it smuggled in extra current past the metering, as one does. And then he took that same wire, carrying 220 volts now, and put it into some extra power controllers, which then went into extra heaters in his device. And I believe that's how he was producing this apparent cold fusion, more output than input by a factor of about 3. So there we are. Now, so we put out a press release how Rossi misled the world through inadvertent miswiring of an earth connection. And Rossi's responded to that. He said, "Smith and Bryce are just Aussie roadkill." So you're looking at roadkill, I'm afraid. And we talked about that and said that's not the reaction of a potential Nobel laureate. So let's call a fake a fake. And that gave rise to our expose. Of course, you're exposing yourself to lawsuits once you say something like that. But we were prepared to put our money where our mouth was. So, and that resulted in an article in the Skeptic magazine, quite a few of them from over the years, going cold on fusion. And the major article was in Skeptical Inquirer magazine, where it got 8 pages. So that was the major article that described it all in great detail. It even described how Rossi wrote. He had a colleague write an authorised biography that included how he thought of it, and Rossi wrote in that biography by Matt Sloan, but authorised by Rossi, how he thought of it, and he said that he was languishing. He was In prison when he thought of it. And what do you think he was in prison for? Another energy scam. So is that a good recommendation? You think of a cold fusion scheme while you're in jail for a previous energy scheme. And the other energy scheme didn't work. He was selling devices, but they, again, didn't work. So we thought that was a pretty telling example. Okay, the wrap-up is we reported that Rossi did not have any scientific qualifications. And as I said, he thought of it while he was in jail. And still, Rossi soldiers on even to this day, 12 years later, with more and more ridiculous demonstrations, trying to get money from investors. And he's got, we estimate, about $10 million from investors so far on what he's been able to, what he's told us. The outcome is that if you do a search on Rossi cold fusion, you come up with a Wikipedia page which refers straight away to my articles. So we take that as a success. And no independent scientists attend anymore. So who else was fooled by Rossi? Who's heard of Brian Josephson? Okay, Steve has. So he won the Nobel Prize for Physics and other, however, he then descended into other weird ideas, which resulted in an article called The Nobel Disease, Why Intelligent Scientists Go Weird in Their Later Years. And I have a follow-up article called Nobel Rot, which was published in The Skeptic. So many scientists were fooled by Rossi, including some who should know better. Okay, now we'll briefly look at some other energy schemes which I've investigated over the decades. One is this simple gravity engine. You can see it's got weights on sticks that on the downside they swing out further, so they've obviously got greater force than the ones on the upside. And there's a diagram on the right showing how it could be turned into a car engine. That's one I saw at an exhibition of inventions. Here's another one which has got permanent magnets, rows of permanent magnets on the inside of looks a bit like a pizza bowl, and a metal rotor. So permanent magnets, they were demonstrating it there. What they do is they give the bowl a spin and it kind of lurches because it gets attracted in some spots and repelled in others. So it lurches around a bit. And then they were taking it apart and gluing in extra magnets in different positions. And they were trying to find the magic position which would create unlimited energy. So that was a fail. Fuel economizer. Here's another one claiming a big fuel saving. And here's a variable ratio transmission which has got a mechanism on the right which can change the relative speed of two shafts. Now it does what is claimed. It worked. It doesn't produce free energy, but it does vary the transmission ratio. And here's a very large one, an energy amplifier. The machine that weighed about 1 ton. It's got everything you can think of. It's got hydraulic systems, it's got a heat engine, it's got oscillating motion, it's got a mechanical rectifier, it's got an electrical generator. So if you want to impress someone, you put more and more technology in it so they can't figure out how it doesn't work. And then there's Lutech. Who's heard of Lutech? That's been published in this. You all have. Okay, well, that's the two perpetrators of that. And at once, when I was investigating that, I rang up, they listed their patents, so I contacted the patent attorney and asked him how they'd got on with him. And the patent attorney said, I told them perpetual motion was impossible, but they didn't want to know. So that's one attitude that we get from people with free energy schemes. So, more articles. And then there was the one in Melbourne by Claridge that we went and inspected, and we agreed on a test method. What came out of that, we had a simple diagram there. 2 methods of testing these devices. One is you put a box around the device under test, and you measure the power in and the power out, electrical measurements. We can do that. The second one is a self-sustaining test, where they Dick said, I don't want to do electrical measurements. I want a simple demonstration that it runs for longer than it should on batteries. So the self-sustaining test is you get it running with a bit of electrical output to heat up a radiator or something, and you see how long it runs. So we did that for Mr. Claridge, and it started off all right. He was going, roar, 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 and then it went, roar, roar, roar. And that was the end of it. So that was another fail. Okay, The Walking Dead, very quickly. This was a talk by a spiritualist called Victor Zammit, who said the dead enter the spirit world and mediums can communicate with them. And he even had a jar of ectoplasm, which he showed us. And someone in the audience, wasn't me, said, what happens to old skeptics when they die? And he said, they often keep walking around because they don't know they're dead. So when I saw some of you this morning, I was reminded of that. Okay, how can I test things at home? Very quickly, there's... you can ask, is there real evidence that it works? That's physical evidence. Is there a theory that makes it possible? And does the track record of the claimant support his or her credibility? If you've got all three legs there, worth following. If you've got one or two legs broken, then forget it. It looks like there's nothing to it. So the summary, we've had a lot of fun investigating these things, but be prepared for the unexpected. Thank you.
We've got some time for questions, so.
Is Steve there?
Okay, Steve, there's someone behind you. You'll be next, don't worry.
I'm a bit concerned that these Swedish scientists who are partly responsible for awarding the Nobel Prize were fooled by this cold fusion device. I mean, were there any professional implications for these scientists and the NASA scientists?
Okay. There was one implication. I contacted them afterwards, after we solved the problem, and sent them my two diagrams and sent them the simple question, could what you observed have possibly been done by this method? And the reply I got was, I suppose it could. And that was I don't think that's a very positive reply, but no, none of the scientists, list of 17 scientists, which were listed on their website, referred to in the Skeptic, 17 scientists backed it up, and not one of them has retracted properly, so that's a bit disappointing.
Steve?
Yeah, Ian, I tested the wine card that you mentioned. We've devised many tests together. But I was wondering, in your early list of claims that we test, one of them was communication with extraterrestrials, and I wondered how you go about testing that.
Oh, okay. There's extraterrestrials indeed, yes. An interesting case there was that a radio amateur in Western Australia that I used to know, he spent long nights with his headphones on, taking measurements on radio signals that he heard from the cosmos, and he did a graph. One was the frequency of a signal and the other axis was the time of arrival, and he plotted out the points on the graph, and then he published an article saying that he compared the dots on the graph with the star chart and concluded that there was a match between it and the star chart. So I told this story at a skeptics meeting sometime after, and they said that I told this story and said that he claimed that they were from the star sign of Betelgeuse. It was indicating that the aliens lived on the Betelgeuse, and someone in the audience, the skeptic audience, laughed and said, "Ho ho ho! I know that's not true." I said, "Why do you say that?" He said, "Because I know these aliens and they're really from Alpha Centauri." So that's my alien story.
One more question here.
Okay.
With the Rossi ECAT, those current and voltage measurements, were they on his instruments, or was it the scientists brought their own instruments?
Okay, they were... The Swedish scientists brought their own instruments. It was very simple. It was an ammeter and voltmeter were the only ones involved. The point is they forgot to measure the earth lead. So the instruments were okay. There was no question there. The Swedish scientists were well across electrical measurements. They just weren't across trickery, was my conclusion.
Brianne.